So I continue this presentation about the 7-stage cycle of speaking. I'm talking about the first stage, where we focus learners' attention on speaking. During this stage, we plan to develop metacognitive awareness about speaking. First of all, what is metacognitive awareness? Metacognition refers to our ability to think about our thinking process. I give an example. When we are speaking, we engage in, and I have talked about it in previous videos, so I just provide a very brief overview of it. If you're interested, I suggest that you watch previous videos. So when we are speaking, we engage in 3 activities, at least 3 mental activities. 1 is the process of conceptualization. 2 is a process of formulation. That's where we use our grammatical knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, etc. to formulate what we want to talk about. And 3 is externalization or articulation. These 3 processes are always monitored. So monitoring is another process. Now, these are known as the cognitive processes underlying speaking. Now, metacognitive is thinking about these cognitive processes, our ability to think about these thought processes, in other words. That's what we mean by metacognitive awareness. We want to help students develop this awareness. We can do it through different ways, but there are 3 knowledge bases that we need to speak about and to raise students' awareness about. The knowledge of person, knowledge of task, and strategies. Person knowledge refers to those cognitive and affective factors that can affect speaking. For example, our self-concept. Who am I? What can I do? What can I not do? And knowing the audience, the knowledge of the audience. For example, if you are speaking about a sophisticated concept in physics, let's say you are speaking for academic purposes or for specific purposes. Now, if your audiences are a group of professionals and experts in physics, then apparently you need to change the sort of vocabulary and structures that you use in order to disseminate information, or to convince them that what you're talking about is correct, or what you're arguing is what. On the other hand, if your audience is not expert in physics, using certain jargons may just confuse them, especially if they have never learned or heard about the jargon. So you can easily confuse them. Therefore, the knowledge of person, that's the interlocutor, and you yourself, that's what you know and what you can do, is important. And as teachers, we need to raise the awareness of our students about this. Number 2 is tasks. What are they going to do, what they're supposed to do, and how they're going to do it, and what's the purpose of that. In order to raise students' metacognitive awareness, we need to provide some information about the genre, the discourse of the verbal discourse, I should say, the structure of the verbal discourse, social linguistic demands of tasks. For example, if you are speaking with your professor versus your close friends, are you expected to use in the same way, or are you going to change your vocabulary and the structures that you use? That certainly also indicates sort of power relations between the 2 persons. Also, skills and knowledges that are required per task are also needed to be talked about. So you need to say, hey, if you're going to do this task, you have to know this and that and that. So why don't you do some research about it? On top of this page, I have written require them to do research, so they can actually do some research. Or in order to raise the awareness about the task, the demands of the task, the knowledges and the skills that they need to perform the task, you can actually create a video or ask them to watch a video or something under some for example, videos from YouTube. Now, strategies are some ways of managing different communication tasks, and they can be effective or non-effective. I've explained this before and talked about them at some level, but I would like to provide an example here. I remember I was attending a presentation on, I think it was neural networks. The presenter wanted to talk about something, and he was trying to use the analogy of crumbled pieces of paper, like this one right in the corner. So that's actually how a crumbled piece of paper looks like, and this is how it sounds. I hope Yeah, I just crumbled one piece of paper. I hope you heard it. He didn't know the word in English, but he said he didn't just stop there and he didn't keep staring at the audience. That's what I mean by ineffective strategies. Just staring at the audience and letting your mind go blank is not an effective strategy. So his strategy was very interesting. He asked the audience, he said, I know how to say that in my mother tongue, but I'm afraid I don't know how to say it in English. And then he just picked a piece of paper, he crumbled it, and he said, that's what I mean. And then someone shouted, oh, I think you mean crumble a piece of paper. That was a very effective strategy. It didn't lead to the breakdown of communication. Everyone was happy at the end, and the meaning was conveyed through a negotiation way of conveying meaning. During this stage, we need to encourage students to plan, because metacognition is primarily about planning, monitoring, and evaluating our progress in our learning, our mental processes, etc. So yes, encourage students to plan their development. Do not be the only planner in the class. Try to transfer some part of responsibility and accountability to students so they take responsibility about their learning. Prepare them to approach specific tasks by raising their awareness about the demands of the task. In this way, we will be promoting self-regulated learning and engage them in self-regulated performance. Self-regulation is one of the important concepts which has a lot of overlaps with metacognition, because during metacognition, especially the planning stage of it, what you're doing is actually you're regulating your own learning and your overall development. That's about stage 1. Now let's go to stage 2, where you provide further input and guide them, but the sort of input gets more specific. The previous stage focuses on metacognition and strategies and raising students' awareness about tasks and persons. At this stage, you try to provide them with some vocabulary, some accurate language. Now, a word of caution is important here. Look, the whole idea of using the 7-stage cycle of teaching speaking is to move students from fluency towards accuracy. In other words, the focus is initially put on the development of their fluency skills rather than accuracy. So it's true that you provide them with some range of vocabulary and perhaps language forms that they need to perform some sort of task at this stage, but you do not want to bombard them with too many words, because it can easily overload their working memory, and they can stop thinking, they can stop focusing on fluency during the task, and that can actually easily can easily lead to the breakdown of communication. So it's fine to provide them just a minimal amount of vocabulary and language that they will need in order to perform the task properly, but not too much. In the same way, you can also help them understand the social linguistic conventions of speech and speakers' roles in the context. If it's an interaction, you can raise their awareness about the conventions that are needed to be kept in mind. Like I said, if they're preparing themselves for a professor-student sort of interaction, you need to talk about power relations there, and power in a social linguistic meaning, really, nothing beyond that. No political meaning is intended here. Social linguistic conventions of conversations between, for example, a doctor and a patient and things like that. Now, you also want them to produce a wide range of utterances and express meaning exactly and precisely as much as you can. So what you could do is, in this stage, you can ask them to practice some part of it, or write down some of the expressions and idioms that can help them in their conversation, or in their interaction with someone, or in their oral presentations and speech delivery. That would be quite helpful. So all in all, this stage aims to help you to scaffold your students by providing some vocabulary support, but not too much, like I said, to hopefully reduce their cognitive load and allow them to allocate their working memory capacity to fluency tasks rather than accuracy, and provide some content and information to help them in this way. So altogether, you will be assisting them to plan for themselves. Like I said, they can take notes, you can create graphs and things like that. Now, what about stage 3? This is perhaps a bit anxiety-inducing for some students, because this is where they conduct this speaking task. And you can allocate some time to it. It could be 20 minutes, it could be more than 20 minutes, depending on the size of the class and the demands of the task. 20 minutes is honestly just a recommendation. It may or may not work in your context of situation. Now, during this stage, students are expected to learn a range of core speaking skills. And I stress skills because they have to externalize the knowledge bases that they have learned or they have practiced and remembered in stages 1 and 2. And then by externalizing it, they will produce language, which means that they are practicing those core speaking skills. So stress over skills is important. The other thing that they do here is to develop fluency in expression of meaning, and as a result, the teacher are not suggested, are not advised to interrupt them, to correct them. It's not advisable to do so because interruption leads to anxiety. And anxiety, when you're anxious during an activity, you don't have any self-confidence. You lose your self-confidence, your subcortical processes start taking over. That's when I'm talking about the subcortical processes in the brain. And when they take over, we can easily forget things. We can start to speak irrationally, grammatically, wrongly, and all sort of things. Therefore, we need to take into account the emotions and feelings of our students during this stage and try not to engage them in sort of activities where they become anxious. So one of the things that Go and Burns suggest here is do not interrupt them often because it can make them anxious.